And there's a fairly well-known picture of James Naismith in the suit with what's believed to be the first basketball team. Of course, he played at the school there. There he is. This is the Springfield Y, where the first game of basketball was played. It's no longer standing. Site of the first game. And that photo that I just showed you, that's right where they're sitting. They're sitting right at that doorway. There's a little, there's a stairway right there in the side. And right where I've placed that is on the side where they would, where they took that photo. But the YMCA is no longer standing. Site of the first game. Site of the first game today. Apparently there's a sign by the bathroom that says that it was once the home of the YMCA. 1891, a group of women from a nearby secretarial college walking by an open door heard the ruckus and investigated. They began attending lunchtime games and eventually asked Naismith if they could play and if he would serve as the referee. He did, but was surprised, and he writes about this, he was surprised by their rough play. And then in 1892, gymnastics instructor Senda Berenson Abbott adapted James Naismith's basketball rules for women and introduced the game at Smith College. And there she is right there, throwing up the jump ball. So women began playing extremely, extremely early in the history of basketball, almost right away. 1894, Naismith married Maudie Sherman from Springfield, Mass. 1895, Naismith accepted a position as physical education director at the Denver, Colorado YMCA, and then in his spare time, he simultaneously pursued a medical degree. A freak accident in a tumbling class at the Denver Y left a somersaulting student dead with a broken neck and Naismith searching for answers. He returned to the spot at the gymnasium where the student had died to pray for guidance regarding his future. And in fact, in later years, when his travels brought him to Denver, he would return to that gymnasium. Soon after the incident, he was offered the job of chapel director at the University of Kansas with the accompanying duties of physical culture director. Stagg recommended Naismith for the job. A chapel program had once been required as a part of the students' daily routine at KU, and when Naismith was hired in 1898, the goal was to revive interest in the program. The latter position included teaching all physical education classes and supervising athletics on campus, including coaching the basketball team. This is the chapel in Old Fraser Hall where Naismith preached when he first arrived on the KU campus in 1898. As the years went by, the religious services became less frequent and participation became less of an emphasis at the university. Naismith was still holding chapel services as late as March 1911, but they were eventually discontinued, though the exact date when is unclear. We're researching that to try to determine exactly when that happened. At KU, Naismith taught physical education. He was the university physician and the athletics coach. However, by 1924, Naismith was relieved of his educational and athletic administrative duties. In all, he taught from 1898 to 1937. Naismith coached from 1899 to 1907. He is the only KU basketball coach with a lifetime losing one-loss record in basketball games, a fact which is often cited. I had a nickel for every time there's something in the media or somewhere else about Naismith, and no matter how long or short the piece is, they always get that in. However, I think it's important to understand that collegiate coaching was different then, and in fact was in a long transition period. It was transitioning from a time in which it was forbidden for a coach to speak to his players during the game, and when coaches often didn't make road trips. And it was transitioning to a standalone profession as we know it today. Coaching, that is. Naismith was succeeded as coach by one of his players, Forrest C. Fogg Allen. first in '09 for the remainder of the season, and then again in 1919, when Allen was hired as the first director of athletics at KU. This job previously had been Naismith's as the manager of athletics. This is a famous picture, 1932. Allen also replaced him as the head of the physical education department in 1924. Forrest C. Fogg Allen coached in 1909, and from 1920 to 1956, he is known as the father of basketball coaching. Two of Allen's players went on to become legendary coaches themselves. Does anyone know who this is up here? You know who that is? Okay, how about this guy right here? Anybody know?
Rupp must be one of them.
Yep. Yep. There's Rupp right there, Adolph Rupp, and there's Dean Smith, along with Larry Brown. Adolph Rupp. And there's Dean Smith, just a year or two ago, I think, with Larry Brown. And Allen built a cathedral of basketball. And if you don't believe me, go there. Because one of the displays is he built a cathedral of basketball. Naismith mentored a legendary coach himself, John B. McClendon. But that really is another story and deserves a lecture of its own. Are you interested? I suggest reading Milton S. Katz, Breaking Through, John B. McClendon, basketball legend and civil rights pioneer. Has anyone ever heard of John B. McClendon?
Oh, yeah.
It's Breaking Through is a very good book. The author's name Katz, K-A-T-Z. But it really is a whole other story, and I can't really do justice to it in a few slides. So, but back to our story. Even though Naismith's official religious role at the university lessened over time, as did his administrative role, he remained committed to the building of character. He volunteered for the Kansas National Guard in 1915 at the age of 54, while still a Canadian citizen. And on March 18, 1915, he was appointed chaplain in the 1st Regiment of the Kansas National Guard. So 26 years after graduating from seminary on April 12, 1916, Naismith was officially ordained as a minister by the presbytery at Clay Center, Kansas. He then became a part of General Pershing's Mexican punitive expedition in pursuit of Pancho Villa, and he did so in the role of a chaplain. And on some of the materials I have here up front, there are a few photos. You can take a look of him during this time, of Naismith during this time, down in Texas, and then elsewhere. In late 2012, James Naismith's grandson, Jim Naismith, who is now the family's spokesperson, contacted me to arrange a meeting to discuss my work. This is during I was on sabbatical. Early in my sabbatical semester, I was thrilled to discuss my work with him and speak with him about his grandfather's life. After our meeting, Naismith sent me a package containing several hundred photocopied pages of typescripts of personal letters between James Naismith and members of his family. The letters dated from throughout his life, with a concentration during the years 1917 to 1919, when Naismith served in the YMCA as part of the National War Work Council under the auspices of the United States military. And this is a transcription it's actually excerpted from the transcription. So this is a letter that Naismith, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but this is a letter that he wrote from El Paso on July 1st, 1917. He's talking about he ran into a young man named Norman Ferguson. And he said, last night I spoke at Camp Baker, and after I got through, a man came up and shook hands and said, I guess you don't know me. Do you remember a curly-headed boy you had in Denver? And this was a man named Norman Ferguson. And Naismith continues, he took me out in his car and showed me all around the city. And then Ferguson took him up to his hotel room to look at family pictures. He told me of a little button that I gave him at the train as we left. And then he goes on to say that Ferguson wanted to spend the day with him the next day, and in fact go to work with him. and then go home for dinner so he could introduce his family to Naismith. Naismith continues, he told me that it was the start in the old YMCA and in the talks that I gave the boys that kept him straight. And then in reply, his wife Maud says, it is nice to feel you have given someone a lift on the road of life, if only a little YMCA button. And my point with this has twofold, really. One, he was continuing to influence people and do what he always did throughout his life, was build character in young men, as he would say. But two, what's interesting about this book project is that I've come upon a number of materials that relate to this period. So, little YMCA button. So here's a photograph of one that I purchased that is from 1895. We don't know what the exact button was that he was given, but you can see it says spirit, mind, and body. Sorry, I pressed me. And then International Committee, and it has the date of 1897 on the back. And I do have in the front there another example of this from the same time period. If you want to take a look at that afterwards. The Y logo went through a number of different changes over time. And that's one of the permutations. All right, so on July 2nd, 1917, Naismith obtained an honorable discharge from the Kansas National Guard. September 1917, appointed to study moral conditions among the troops of American Expeditionary Forces and to develop a program of sex education there. A representative of the War Department Commission on Training Camp Activities, working under the National War Work Council of the YMCA, he was the first director of physical activities with the AEF and Allied troops. And there he is in Paris. Across the flyleaf of the little khaki-covered New Testament that he carried, he wrote, I will be a man strong in body, clean in mind, lofty in ideals. First he'd written sound in body, and then rewording the phrase, he wrote strong in body. And this is actually from Dennis's collection. This is not that same Bible, but this is a Bible of his that is signed, along with a couple other items. This is a New Testament that is from the period that I purchased, that is actually up front, and it's in a little plastic cover. And please don't take it out of the cover, but you're welcome to take a look at it afterwards. And what's interesting about this is it's khaki covered, right? These are the Bibles, the New Testaments that were given to soldiers when they went to boot camp. And on pasted in actually is this little piece of paper that says, "Comrades with the book. My name signed here expresses my sincere purpose to carry and read this book every day." And over here on the table at the end, it's laying down now, there's actually a poster, which, here, I'll just show you. So this says, "Mother, I promise to read it every day." And the shadow of the mother is kind of over, a little creepy. But the mother's watching over the son, who's, on his cot in his tent, reading his little Bible like this. And the New Testament is right here, and the pen is right there too. April 1919, Naismith returned to Lawrence and came back to KU. He remained involved in religious activities, and he also taught Sunday school at the local Presbyterian church, First Presbyterian. Then he became something of an itinerant preacher, substituting in congregations around Lawrence when needed. And he was involved in teaching religion here at KU at a building at the edge of campus. But that's another story. So this is the couple pictures of the church in Vinland. If you're familiar, this is next to the Coal Creek Library, which is the oldest library in Kansas, and the two sisters who ran that library for many years. One has passed away, the other is still living. And second or third hand, I've not been able to interview her, but I understand that the older sister who passed away remembered being in the congregation when Naismith was preaching. And there are letters in that collection that are back and forth between Naismith and a representative of the congregation at Vinland. In 1920, the newly formed Council of Religious Workers wrote a constitution for an interdenominational school at KU. The new institution was housed in brick-veneered Myers Hall, which had originally been the frame house used by the Disciples of Christ for the Kansas Bible Chair. There's an old photograph of a postcard, of Myers Hall. In 1901, the Disciples of Christ had inaugurated the Kansas Bible Chair for the teaching of religion to students and other interested individuals. Though not part of the university, it was located in a house at one edge of the campus in Lawrence at the corner of 13th Street and Jayhawk Boulevard. There's a photograph and it's written on the bottom, Old Myers Hall.
Where the parking garage is now, that's where it was.
Sorry, it's freezing up for some reason. All right, August 31st, 1921, the Kansas School of Religion was chartered. One of the incorporators was James Naismith. This is Naismith's name on the charter's board of directors list. And there's a bulletin on the left announcing the courses for that first year. And students were able to literally step off campus and go to class and get credit for a class or two. Even though it was a state university that wasn't supposed to be teaching religion, they were allowed to step off campus. And so it's very interesting because religion was taught very, very early in terms of the history of religious studies departments and that sort of thing. The teaching of religion was at a very early period here at KU. 1922 courses were offered by the school were accepted for credit at KU. Smith Hall was built on the site of Myers Hall and dedicated in 1967.
Who was Smith?
Ida, I believe her name was Ida Smith.
Yeah.
She was a donor who donated a large tract of land in western Kansas, I think.
Mm-hmm.
The university created the Religious Studies Department in 1977. There's the KU Department of Religious Studies. Smith Hall. Naismith also was a charter member of something called the Saturday Night Club, a group that met for dinner and discussion, with members taking turns reading a paper. Naismith's topics included athletics and religion and the development of character through athletics. In 1936, Naismith traveled to the Olympics in Berlin, Germany to watch the introduction of basketball as an Olympic sport. Fog Allen had organized a National Association of Basketball Coaches initiative called the Naismith Fund to collect money to send Naismith to Berlin. They actually collected change at high school basketball games, pennies and nickels and stuff. The games were played outside. 1936, there was an inauguration ceremony, in Berlin. After a tribute from the organizational committee, he throws the ball for the first match of the Olympic Games. No known photos exist, including at the International Olympic Committee archive. There's a small snippet of video of Naismith shaking hands with some of the basketball players outside of a building, presumably after this ceremony. That appears in the ESPN 30 for 30 documentary about the rules. There's No Place Like Home, which I was interviewed for, but shockingly, my footage didn't make the final cut. But the director was nice enough to give me my film footage, which I have, the interview. Now, so But there are no photos of this, so if anybody knows of any, please let me know. And I know that the photos aren't there because I checked. It's a picture of me in Lausanne, Switzerland. Well, not of me, but of beautiful Switzerland. Isn't it like beautiful? Look at that. I was there to give a paper, actually. 1937, his wife Maud dies. Naismith died in 1939 and is buried in Memorial Park Cemetery in Lawrence. The Naismiths are buried in the shadow of a Masonic sculpture, sorry that cut off, that is the architectural focal point of Memorial Park. If you go there, you'll see that's that Masonic sculpture, and in the foreground there is the gravesite right here. This is Naismith's funeral program. At a certain point, I was invited to Lawrence Masonic Lodge number 6, of which Naismith was a past member and active member, past master and active member, to meet with a more recent past master, who provided me with details of Naismith's involvement in Lodge number 6. I was allowed to view and photograph the typewritten minutes of various lodge sessions involving Naismith, as well as multiple original meeting registers containing his signature. This individual also gave me a copy of an essay he had written for an in-house Masonic newsletter about Naismith's Masonic involvement. I am certain that I have received unprecedented access to this material. No existing publications, scholarly or otherwise, have incorporated any depth of information regarding Naismith's Masonic activities. This is when he receives a certificate for being a Master Mason for 25 years in Lawrence. This is a photograph of the library here in Lawrence. And sorry, you can't see that. That's George Washington in his Masonic regalia. Hattie E. Burdett. Apparently this is a well-known photograph of Washington that appears, it's in a number of different lodges around the country. All right, and then this is an example of the typed minutes. And in this in this excerpt, it is announcing that Naismith has been referred from his original lodge of Roswell Lee Lodge in Springfield, Massachusetts. He's been recommended on demit, is what they call it, so that he can become a member of the Lawrence Lodge in 1921. And he eventually rose to be master of the lodge. And it says, the petition for James Naismith for membership on demit from Roswell Lee Lodge of Springfield, Massachusetts. This, I'm not going to read the whole thing. This is actually a letter that was, or a comment that was made. The minutes